Hey guys, Jim with Behemoth Drivetrain, and in today's tutorial video we're going to show you how to take the gears from a Borg-Warner 1354 and get them installed in your Behemoth Drivetrain Ranger model Strongbox. In this first step, you're going to take your 1354 case and you're going to remove these 6 bolts here and remove that cover plate. And when you do that, the planetary gear inside is going to come out and come off with that plate. That's step 1. Now you've pried off that front plate, exposing the gears inside. And you can see how that planetary gear is going to come off with your plate. As you get into the case and you look at your planetary gear, one important thing to point out is that the gears from a 1350 model Borg-Warner are going to look really similar to the gears of a 1354. There's a couple subtle differences, and every now and then we'll get a customer trying to put a 1350 gear set into their 1354 model Strongbox, and they can't do it because this isn't the right gear, but they look really similar. So one thing to look for, 1354 is going to have 6 pinion gears. So every now and then you'll get into a case with a few of those removed, and it might only have 4 of the 6, but a 1350 is going to be set up where it can only house a maximum of 4 gears. Another difference is going to be this lip you see on this side. The 1354 has the lip, whereas the 1350 does not. So a couple small but very key differences. So a 1350 model gear set is not going to work in this Ranger Strongbox. That said, we are coming out with some 1350 model Strongboxes later in the year. But for right now, 1354 is what you want to look for. And if your gears look like this, you're good to go. Now we'll move on to the next step. All right, in this next step, we're now going to remove the bolts holding together the middle sections of the case. And we're going to split the case apart so that we can remove the ring gear and the shift hub, which we're going to use in our Strongbox here in a few steps. Now with the case fully split apart, you can see all the major components we need to complete your Strongbox. This half of the case, you can see the ring gear inside, we can see our shift hub, and again our planetary that we removed at the beginning of the process. In the next step, we're going to take this part of the case over to our press, and we're going to press out this ring gear, which we're going to add to our Strongbox here in a few steps. So as you press out the ring gear, you want to be really careful not to damage the teeth. If you don't have a press or you don't feel comfortable pressing it out in this way, you do have the option of cutting the side of the case and then just kind of whacking the case apart. So either option will work. Carefully cut your case apart and remove the gear, or use a press, quickly press it out, being careful of the teeth. Now with the ring gear removed, you first want to take a minute and clean off any debris that might be on the outside or the inside of this gear. And after you've done that, now we're ready to take your Strongbox over to the press, and we're going to insert and press the gear in to your new Strongbox. All right, so now we're back over the press and we're ready to press our ring gear into the Strongbox housing. A couple things to point out. On the flip side of this, we're reusing an old gasket in this case, but you might want to put a piece of paper or something on the bottom so you don't mark up the exterior of your housing. Another important thing to point out is you want the pressure when it's applied to be on the outer edge, not on this inner ring, as that can damage your Strongbox and impede functionality. Now if you don't have a press, some people have been able to do this using a vise and just slowly using a vise to clamp everything together and press it in, though we highly recommend using a press of some kind. All right, now looking at your ring gear, you're going to notice some splines on the outside, and these splines are going to cut into the housing to help hold it in place. You'll also notice this sort of beveled edge. This is going to be your downward facing edge in the Strongbox, and it's going to help us seat the ring correctly and evenly inside the Strongbox housing. Before you get started though, it's important to apply a little bit of oil to the inside lip, which is going to make it a little easier for that gear to slide into place and for those splines to cut the housing to hold the gear in place as it's pressed. So now we're ready to roll. We're going to press the gear in, get it nice and even, and then we're going to apply our top plate so that way we've got an even downward pressure. Now as you press, you might have to make some adjustments, so don't just mash this thing down and go all the way in. It's going to kind of go in a little lopsided here or there, so you might have to release your press, hit a little bit to one side or the other, and adjust it to keep evenness as the gear is inserted. Okay, now with our ring gear inserted, the next thing we want to do is take a minute and blow out the inside and wipe out the interior of this housing. Make sure that any debris, any metal shavings that may have occurred from the splines cutting into place when you press the gear in are all cleaned out and out removed from the housing before you move on to the next step. Another important thing to point out is that the edge of this ring gear is going to rest slightly above this raised edge on your housing, and that is by design. It's not supposed to be flush. You don't want it to be flush, but we get questions about that all the time. So rest assured, it is okay if you are just slightly above the housing height right here with the edge of your ring gear. So we're ready to move on to the next step. All right, in this next step, earlier we detached the cover plate from our transfer case, exposing the planetary gear. Now we need to remove that planetary gear from the cover plate. And you're going to do that by loosening the snap ring here on the interior of the assembly. So you're going to pry those lobes apart, which will then loosen and release the planetary gear from the plate. Now sometimes this can really stick. You might have to tap on it with a hammer or really wiggle it to get it out. In this case, it just happened to pop right out, and we're ready to move to the next step. Okay, in this next step, we are going to remove a snap ring from just over the bearing on this planetary, and if you look, there's going to be a little notch here, and you're going to insert your snap ring pliers and begin prying this guy apart. And you might have to put in some serious effort to get this to really loosen up, and the easiest way sometimes is open it really far and bend it just a little bit, which will give you enough space to wiggle that shaft and bearing assembly out of the planetary. Now that that snap ring has been removed, we're going to take this assembly back over to our press so we can press that shaft out of the bearing. With the shaft removed, take your bearing and your planetary. Let's go back to the workbench and move on to the next step. Okay, so you want to save the snap ring that you took off the shaft a moment earlier. This snap ring probably got bent out a little bit wide. You might have to put it back into your vise and tighten it back up when you go to reuse it. Future models of this case, we're going to be including an upgraded new snap ring. So depending on when you're watching this video, this snap ring may or may not be included with your kit. The other snap ring that was holding your planetary in place, however, that you can throw away, and you're going to be using the thrust washer and new snap ring included with your kit in your final assembly. Looking at our planetary assembly, the bearing and the thrust washer that you see here are going to go into your Strongbox the same way they are assembled in the original planetary setup. So a lot of people have confusion over this, and sometimes they occasionally get it wrong, but when you reassemble this and put it into your closet or into your Strongbox, this is the sequence that they get placed onto the planetary in your Strongbox. In this next step, we're going to take the bearing that you just removed from your original donor planetary. So we're going to take this donor bearing, and it's going to get inserted into the middle section of your Strongbox, and we're going to press that into place with our press. And then shortly after, in the following step, we're going to be using your thrust washer and new snap ring included with your kit to hold that bearing into place. We'll get to that step coming up. As we get closer to assembling and gearing up the Strongbox, one important thing to point out is that the majority of the load is going to be carried in the rear of the Strongbox. So you want to put your strongest gears in the rear. If you're one of those people who open up your transfer case and you have a 4 and a 6 planetary option, you always want to put the strongest, the largest gear set, the 6 planetary, in the rear, as opposed to putting that 4 pinion. Most people are going to find a 6 pinion, but if you are one of the people with a 4, then make sure if you're choosing between the 4 and the 6, put the 6 in the rear and the 4 pinion in the front. Okay, in this step, now we're ready to insert our planetary into the housing. We're going to start by grabbing our preferably 6 pinion planetary, and we're going to insert that into the ring gear so it's engaged. And now we're going to insert our shaft. You'll notice we have this on a raised platform. The transfer case adapter is a great platform to put the housing on as you're inserting the shaft to give you a little extra room to work. For this next step, we're going to go back to the press and we're going to press our shaft into place. One important thing to note, there are female splines on the inside of your planetary gear, and there are male splines on the exterior of the shaft. So you can see the female to the male splines. When you insert your shaft, you want to make sure that the splines line up and engage smoothly, that there's no binding, that you're not forcing that shaft into place. You want to make sure it aligns. So again, it's important to point out, before you begin pressing that shaft into place, you want to make sure those male splines are lined up with the female so that they press down into the female spline groove. If they're not lined up properly, you can bust the planetary, you can bust the ring gear, you can damage your splines and your gears and start this whole process over. All right, in this next step, we're going to reinsert the original snap ring that came from your donor case that we removed from the planetary gear earlier. Or again, if this is a later model Strongbox, you're going to use the new snap ring we've included with your kit. One easy way to tell if you've inserted your shaft correctly is that you should, from this view, be able to see the snap ring groove on the exterior of the shaft. So now we're going to place that snap ring back into position. Once that snap ring is inserted into the snap ring groove, we're ready to grab our seal and insert it over the shaft. In this next step, grab the seal that was included with your kit, put a little oil on that seal because we're going to press this into place and it's going to need some lubrication to fit and seat correctly. So lube the shaft, lube around the outside of the housing, and put that seal into place. A great tool to use to press this into place is going to be the original shift hub off your donor case. And with all that together, we're now going to take this whole assembly back over to our press, use that press to insert it into position. Make sure you've got a nice even surface that you're pressing your seal into place with, and once positioned, you're ready to press down and insert your seal. So now we're done with the press, we've inserted our seal, but an important thing to point out, the seal is not pressed flush with the surface. Don't do that. press it too far, it can cause binding against your shaft, and your shaft's not going to be able to turn. So you want to press this down until you have about 1/8 of an inch of your seal above the surface of the Strongbox housing. So about the top of your fingernail right there. About 1/8 of an inch. You want your seal top to be about 1/8 of an inch above the surface when you press it in to the housing. That's good to go. Let's move on to the next step. All right, so now we're ready to put the finishing touches and insert gears in your Ranger Standard model. You can see the difference here between the Ranger Shorty and the Ranger Standard. The Shorty's not going to have the clocking ring, and it's going to be a couple inches shorter front to back. So with that covered, let's get some gears into this standard Ranger Strongbox model. Okay, in this next step, we're going to insert our shift hub into the Strongbox. Important to note, the swivel blocks on the inside of the housing are offset, so you can see a little more material towards the interior on the shift carrier side. You want to make sure this slightly fatter side is positioned as you see it here, with the offset on the inside. So with those in position, angle them up slightly, and you may want to shift your carrier so that the carrier is protruding up and out of the Strongbox a little bit, as seen here. Now grab your shift hub, and we're going to insert it into the swivel blocks and make sure it's firmly in position. Now we're going to shift it to pull that hub down into the interior of the housing. Once that's done, you're ready to grab your shaft and insert into the shift hub. You might have to apply some pressure to press it down so the shaft is pressed firmly up against the bearing, making sure all the shafts, the splines of the shafts, align. The shaft inserted, we're ready to join the two halves of our housing together. So earlier we installed the planetary in the front section of the Strongbox, and now we're going to insert that over the shaft, kind of finagle it back and forth until we get the splines to line up between the planetary and the shaft. Once you find fit, you're able to insert your socket head cap screws and begin mounting the halves together. It's important to note that you have clocking ability on around the clocking ring section of the Strongbox, but also between the front and the middle section, you have additional clocking options here. So you can rotate that front, this blue section here, to get even more clocking positions available, which is unique to the Strongbox series. Once you find the clocking position you want, join the halves together and tighten your bolts down. You want to tighten these bolts to approximately 30 foot-pounds of torque. With all 6 socket head cap screws inserted, tighten down to 30, with all 5 socket head cap screws inserted, tighten down to approximately 30 foot-pounds of torque. Your Ranger Standard Strongbox assembly is complete. You're ready to hit the trail. If you have additional questions, feel free to give our support team a call or email us at support@BehemothDrivetrain.com.